Welcome to the Very Decent Podcast. Today we're talking with Philadelphia injury attorney Tyler Wilk. Let's get into it. Tyler Wilk, thanks for being here, man.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Okay, so we're going to talk all about personal injury law. We're going to talk about your law firm, Wilk Law for sure. Before we get into any of that, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from?
Grew up in Delaware, probably most of my life. Stayed around the area, went to college at LaSalle University in Philadelphia, came back to law school back down in Delaware at Widener, and moved to Westchester during my tenure at Widener. And then a couple years ago, we've moved to Newtown Square, Pennsylvania, and we've been there ever since.
When you were growing up, what kind of a kid were you? Were you athletic, book smart?
Super athletic, not book smart.
Super athletic.
Yeah, I played every single sport you could think of. I played soccer, basketball, football, lacrosse, tennis.
Okay, so I hear personal injury lawyers talk all the time about like a warrior mentality. And some of these guys, it almost seems like a sport to them. Mm-hmm. Is there a correlation there? Is there something to that?
Absolutely. When I played sport, I was probably the most competitive person you could imagine. Always had to win, always had to be the best. I remember even playing basketball when I grew up. I remember back in the day, they had those and one mixtapes. So I used to buy the and one mixtapes, study all the moves, practice them in my driveway. I had the shoes with like the weights on the tip so I could improve my jump and, hopefully dunk one day, which never happened, unfortunately. But yeah, I was always, no matter what I did or whatever sport I played, I always had to be the best, or at least try to be the best, and was super competitive. And that definitely correlates into other aspects of my life.
What made you decide to go to college? Someone who's good at athletics, not good at academics, maybe they think about trade school, but you were college bound.
Yeah, it was more of like the family I grew up in. My dad is very old school. It's like, what you do in life is you get an education, you go to college, you get a job, and you work your way up in the company and you be successful. So that was kind of like a you don't have a choice type of thing. So I was like, you're going to college, you can choose which one, but you're going, so.
And what did you study for undergrad?
My degree was actually in marketing.
Marketing?
Yeah.
So all of this is familiar to you then, right?
Not necessarily, because I didn't pay attention as much as I should have in school, but Some of it, yeah.
So at what point did you decide to go to law school? Or at what point did you suspect that you might want to go down that path?
Yeah, so after college, my dad does real estate. I thought I wanted to follow in his path. So after college, I took a job working for a real estate firm in the city. Doing commercial appraisals and commercial valuation. So did that for about a year or so. We were working with a lot of law firms in litigation, like, properties that were in litigation, high rises, commercial buildings. And I quickly realized that I liked what they were doing more than what I was doing. So that's kind of when the light went off in my head. And I was like, you know what, I should, I think I want to apply to law school and take it from there.
Okay, so you graduated college, worked for a bit, tried the real estate thing, like what your dad was doing. And then you got turned on to maybe becoming a lawyer. So then what was the process like applying for law school and getting that started?
It was rough, just because I didn't do so well academically in college. So I think I applied to 50 plus law schools around the nation and was accepted to 2, one being Widener, and decided to stay local and go there.
Okay, so today you are an elite personal injury lawyer, but there's many, many practice areas that you can choose to go into. Mm-hmm. Did you know you wanted to do personal injury right from the get-go, or did you just, know lawyer is what you wanted?
No, I just knew lawyer. And I think my dream back then was working for being like a corporate lawyer, working for a large firm, or a large corporation, and, working my way up to be partner one day and, climbing the ladder and, so on and so forth. So no idea about personal injury or anything related to it.
But you wanted to do big law, corporate law, kind of like in the movies.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
At what point did you pivot away from that and decide to explore personal injury?
So I had, ironically, after my first year, it was my first semester in law school, very first semester. I just finished up, it was around December, I just finished up my last law school final exam, which was torts. And if you don't know, torts is personal injury, essentially, the law of negligence. So just finished up my final exam, go out to celebrate. I was living in Westchester at the time. Go out to the bars, have a couple drinks with my friends. Leaving the bars that night, I'm walking across the street and a drunk driver pulls out of a parking lot, speeds, hits me as I'm walking, crossing the street and knocks me down on the ground. So, obviously knowing what I knew at the time, I hired a law firm, local law firm to Westchester, and asked them to, to help me with the case. And long story short, they did an awful job. And, as that happened, I realized that, I wanted to help people that have been in similar situations, to ensure and guarantee that they, if they're seeking help or justice or they're injured, that they get the help that they deserve and they're never left in a position like I was left in.
Okay, well, that is like serendipitous timing. So you were going to law school. You had just finished your final exam for torts, right? Personal injury.
Yep.
You're celebrating.
Yep.
And you get run over by a drunk driver while you're walking down the street.
Ironic, right?
Wow. Okay. And then you said the lawyer that you hired did a bad job. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, it was all so I didn't know anything about the process back then, right? You can take a final exam and you can learn what a tort is and, so on and so forth, but you don't know the actual legal process. So, I retained his firm. I went to treatment. I had a pretty bad lower back injury. At that point in time, it was very difficult to get around. I remember even in law school, in some of my classes, I had to stand in the back of the class. I couldn't even sit down because, I had nerve pain from a herniated disc that I sustained during the accident. So long story short, they didn't really do what they were supposed to do. And they ended up, going to a mediation and coming to me at the end of the mediation. This is about 2 years later. And, they're like, hey, there's a $5,000 offer on the table and it's take it or leave it.
5,000, take it or leave it.
Take it or leave it. And that's not including, costs, attorney's fees, so on and so forth. And, I'm like, well, leave it. I'm like, I don't want that. Let's try the case. And they're like, well, no, we're not, we don't feel comfortable trying the case because, we don't think we'll win. And mind you, this is, during this whole 2-year process, the whole time, all I heard was, oh, you've got a great case and it's worth $100,000 and this and that, right? So to me, this is a huge shock. And, I'm going back and forth with them and I'm like, what do you mean? Like, you told me this was a good case. I'm injured. This is a permanent injury. And, what it came down to is they basically said, look, you have two options. You can take the offer and settle, or you can decline it, get another law firm to help you. But if you do that, you're going to have to pay us back. It was like $2,900 in costs for what we spent. And, at the time I'm a broke law school student. I didn't have $3,000 to spend. So I had no choice. I took the offer, walked away with, maybe less than $1,000, and that was it.
Okay. So I hear lawyers talk about all the time, the cost of hiring the wrong lawyer. It's the most expensive decision that you could potentially ever make.
Yep.
Right? You've got to find a good lawyer.
Yeah.
You've experienced that firsthand, right? Everyone talks about it, but you've actually experienced that.
Yep.
Do you have any idea what you think that case should have been worth had you had a good lawyer?
I mean, with my experience now, I remember that the defendant had a $100,000 policy. So I think it could easily have been worth $100,000.
$100,000 policy, and they settled for $5,000.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, I went through treatment. I had epidural injections. I mean, it was a pretty significant case. In hindsight, at the time, obviously, I didn't know, how do you value a case when you've never, just like regular clients, right? Like, how do you value a case? In your mind what you'd like to get paid for it, but you don't know what the case could actually be worth. But now, looking back on that time, I know that, it was a severe injustice, to accept that amount of money, but lesson learned.
Tyler, I heard someone once say something that really stuck with me, which was, your purpose comes from your pain. So when you look at a lot of successful people, not all the time, but oftentimes they'll have some sort of story. Their father died of a heart attack, and so they decided to become a cardiologist to try to contribute something to the world in that area. And it sounds like that's exactly what happened to you.
Oh, absolutely. Even though at the time it was a terrible situation, the outcome was terrible. It bothered me for years. In hindsight, I mean, it brought me to where I am today, and I wouldn't trade that for anything. So in the end, it was a blessing in disguise, but at the time, it's hard to see it that way.
Hard to see it that way at the time.
Yeah.
Okay, so you finished law school. Then what?
So I finished law school, took a job with a defense firm, actually, an insurance defense firm. So I went traded, went to the other side. But, people don't realize is like when you graduate law school, just because you're a lawyer doesn't mean it's easy to get a job, right? It's like most law firms, they want lawyers with experience. And how do you get experience right out of law school, right? It's like, you got to start somewhere. So at the time, that was, a firm that offered me a position. I took it. So I did. And in hindsight, it actually helped me because I got to see how the other side actually operates, right? Like how defense firms operate, how insurance carriers operate before I even got into the plaintiff side. So took a firm there, worked for insurance defense for about a year. Didn't like it just because it didn't feel right to me. It was basically, picture somebody being in a really bad accident and being severely injured, right? And your job is to go through their medical records and pick out every little thing you can to try to poke holes in the case, right? Or poke holes in, their injury, or, explain why they're not as injured as they say they are. And it just didn't feel right. It wasn't a good feeling to do that to somebody because, if someone's in a car accident and they're injured, you can't, it's subjective, right? If they say they're in pain and the medical records reflect that, can you argue to the opposite? Sure, in some capacity, but it didn't feel right to me. So I left there and I started to work for a plaintiff's personal injury firm, which I liked much better. Was there for about 2 years and then decided during that time that I wanted to go out on my own and open up my own firm.
Personal injury lawyers sometimes get a bad rap, the whole like ambulance chaser thing. But I think a misconception is that a lot of people feel like, well, a personal injury lawyer is suing a person, that there's a person on the other end of that. And, obviously, if it's a car accident, for example, sure, there's a person who is driving the vehicle, but it's the insurance company who is actually on the other side. So we talk about plaintiff side, defense side. It's not like you're not in the business of suing people, right? You're in the business of helping people who have been in a bad situation, whether it be a car accident or they slipped and fell. Something terrible happened to an individual person, and then there's an insurance company on the other side of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that accurate?
Yeah, and that's one of people's biggest misconception. We have clients call our firm all the time and, they say, oh, but, it was an accident and I don't want to sue anyone and I'm not the type to sue and, so on and so forth. But what they don't realize is, that's why insurance coverage exists, right? Because if someone's negligent, someone injures you as a result of an accident, you go after the insurance coverage. Even if you're suing the person personally on paper, the insurance company is the one footing the bill. So you're not actually, digging into their pockets or bankrupting them or garnishing their wages or any of the other things that people unrealistically think may happen.
So I'm curious about your perspective from your time working in the insurance defense side of things. What's something that most people don't know about insurance companies when it comes to these sort of situations?
What most people don't know, and I think this applies to a lot of people that try to handle cases on their own, insurance companies have one objective in mind is their bottom line, right? So like claims adjusters, defense counsel, they get bonused and paid based on the least amount of money that they pay out, right? So like their job is to settle the claim as quickly as possible for the least amount of money as possible. So, we'll see a lot of times when clients contact us, even 2-3 days after the accident or even the next day, right? And they'll say to us, oh yeah, the insurance company is already offering me, $2,000 or $1,000. And it's like, what they don't realize is if you accept that money and you sign that release, anything that happens in the future, any additional medical expenses, any additional procedures, any additional pain and suffering is off the table. So I think, what people don't realize is like, that's, someone will call you on the phone, they'll be your best friend and they'll, hey, how are you, Ryan? And so sorry to hear what happened. And, oh, can I compensate you for your lost wages? I have, $1,000 and, so on and so forth. And the client, unbeknownst to them, like, sure, I would love $1,000 for my lost wages. Sure. Sign this DocuSign and it'll be deposited by the end of the day. And people don't read what they sign most of the time, right? So they sign a release for bodily injury, wages, any future, so on and so forth, and then they're done. And that's it. And then they call us, and I can't even tell you how many times someone's called us and they said, well, yeah, I just accepted money. And, I say, did you sign a release? No, I just took the money. And little do you know, the insurance company sends us a signed release and the case is over.
Okay, so maybe a word of advice to anyone who's tuning into this: talk to a lawyer before you accept any money or sign anything from an insurance company?
Always, even if you're not sure if you're going to need treatment or if you're injured or if, what's going to happen in the future, every lawyer, most lawyers like me, they offer free consultations. So there's no downside to speaking to someone, getting some advice, letting them point you in the right direction, whether or not they accept the case or not. We've done that with many clients. And even if it's a case that, I don't think we can take, I'll still give them advice. I'll still try to point them in the right direction just so they don't get taken advantage of. Because, if you don't know the insurance industry and you've never been in an accident before, then you really have no idea what you're doing.
Okay, so you went out on your own. You worked for a couple of years at another law firm, and then you went out on your own. Today, Wilk Law is an elite law firm. Now, you're not a big law firm in terms of staff, but that's actually a good thing, or it could be, right?
Yeah, that's kind of how I wanted it to be. I've worked with a lot of the larger law firms, and, the problem with those law firms is when you're a client at one of those law firms, you're pretty much just like a number, a file number or a case number, right? Do they handle cases efficiently? Sometimes, but you really don't get the personalized attention or care that I think people that are in these types of situations deserve. At my firm, I wanted to keep it a certain size or keep it under a certain size. That way, every client that came in, we could give them personalized attention. We could give their case personalized care. We could make sure everything was handled properly. We could make sure they're being communicated with properly. And I really take the time to speak with almost all of our clients, either at the time of inception, settlement, throughout the process at one point or another, because I like to reach out. I like to, have conversations, see what's going on in their life, how this is affecting them, and, how we can help. That's super important to me. So with a firm a certain size, you just physically can't do that. And I never wanted our firm to be that or be that size.
But you have a lot of crazy stories. Tell us a story.
Oh man, if I had to pick one, it'd probably be the time that we made somebody cry in court.
Somebody cry in a courtroom?
Yeah, it was actually a defense counsel on a case we had. He was trying to keep information out that we needed in the case. So we filed a motion, and long story short, we're in front of the judge and he grants our motion, but he chews the defense counsel out for not being prepared and, just basically filing this frivolous motion. And, we leave the courtroom and I walk out, and defense counsel's standing in the hallway up against the wall, and he's got tears, in his eyes. Maybe it was because he lost, maybe it was because he got chewed out by the judge, but nonetheless, he was crying outside of the courtroom. So I thought that was pretty unique.
Wow. Okay. What is the biggest settlement or verdict that you've won in the last year?
So far this year, we've got a $2.4 million settlement for a car accident case.
$2.4 million?
Yeah.
What's the story there?
So pretty crazy story. Our client was a good Samaritan traveling down the highway, saw someone broken down with a flat tire, pulled to the shoulder, got out, offered to call AAA to help them out. As they're standing outside the car on the phone with AAA, this guy, maybe texting, maybe drunk, who knows, driving down the highway at a high rate of speed, crashes into the disabled vehicle, pushing that vehicle into our client, knocking him on the ground and causing pretty serious injuries.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was terrible. And the worst part about it was that the insurance companies tried to deny the claim from the get-go. So they tried to put blame on our client. They said he was at fault. They tried to weasel their way out of paying any money. And, it was a long, hard fought battle. And I can tell you that the accident happened in 2020, September of 2020. We settled the case in 2024. So it took us 4 years to get to the finish line, but we fought as hard as we possibly could. And, we never gave up, and we got a recovery for our client. And I think that's what a lot of people don't understand is insurance companies will fight and they will deny and they will see who gives up first, right? And a lot of law firms, they give up first, but it's always our objective is like, we'll never be the first one to fold, right? Like we'll go to trial, we'll do whatever we have to do. We'll never be the first one to back down. And, usually when we take that approach to these types of cases, they're usually the ones that end up folding in the end.
I mean, that's a huge swing. So the insurance company was trying to give zero?
Zero. They offered zero. They offered nothing for 4 years.
What? And $2.4 million
Yep.
was the ultimate settlement.
Yeah. I mean, we just beat them down. We stayed aggressive. We advocated on behalf of our client, and we were successful in obtaining the recovery we wanted.
I mean, that's life-changing money, man. I'm sure your client would prefer not to have been hit to begin with, but given that he had to go through that terrible situation, I'm sure he's a lot more comfortable getting that $2.4 million that you got for him.
Oh, absolutely. And I tell everyone, it's like, look, the money doesn't mean anything if you have lifelong injuries, but in a civil case, it's the only remedy that we can obtain for you. So it's our job to get as much as we possibly can to make sure that you're made, whole and that you're covered for whatever happens in the future and whatever occurred in the past.
Okay. So a 4-year battle. How did your client find out that they were finally going to get what was coming to them, a $2.4 million settlement verdict? I mean, did you make a phone call? What was
No, we had an all-day mediation. We sat in a mediation for 9 hours. And at the end of the mediation, we finally came to an agreement. And, that's how he found out. So he was actually there in person and was able to find out the same time I found out.
I'm trying to put myself in his shoes. I mean, what was his reaction when he found out that it was over and he was getting that money?
Oh man, it was emotional. I mean, it was emotional for both of us. I think at first it was surreal, right? Because like you're in there and you have nothing and then the case is settled and, we pack our stuff up and the mediation was in Center City and he asked me if I, wanted to walk across the street and grab a drink with him. And I remember we walked out of the building, walked across the street, to a little dive bar and he just broke down in tears. And, I remember I even had tears in my eyes, right? Because this is 4 years, 4 years I've been dealing with this client and working with him and involved in his life and seeing, all the mishaps and all the tragedies he had to go through. So, it was emotional to see him emotional and to be able to secure such a good recovery on his behalf.
It's awesome. He picked the right lawyer, that's for sure.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Okay, so I feel like when a lot of people try to contact a personal injury lawyer, they just don't really know how to figure out if they're speaking to the right person or someone who's going to do a good job. What would you say? What advice would you have for someone looking for a personal injury lawyer?
So here's a good question you should ask any injury lawyer before you hire them is how many cases they've litigated in the past 12 months. And if the answer to that is less than 3, you should run away quickly. So the problem with a lot of these law firms are, you have a settlement personal injury mill, and then you have litigation firms, right? Settlement personal injury mills, they'll get your case, they'll settle them for the lowest, quickest dollar they can, and then they'll push you out the door. Litigation firms, they'll work up your case. They'll pay time and attention to it. They'll make sure that you get every single dollar you can possibly get out of it, which is what we do, right? And I take all of my cases personally. In fact, I often lose sleep at night if I send out a demand letter or an insurance company makes an offer and it's super low. Because, you can't help but get involved with these clients and you talk to them and you see day to day what they do and what they go through, right? So it becomes a personal involvement. So, really it's a personal thing, right? Like I'm not going to accept anything less than what the client would accept on their behalf.
Okay, so someone calls in. Well, before they call in, they're looking at websites. And like all these websites, for the most part, look the same, right? Everyone says that they litigate cases. No one's going to put on their website like, oh, we take the cheap settlement.
Yep.
So you call in, you get a lawyer on the phone, and you ask them, how many cases have you personally taken to trial in the last 12 months? That's what you want to ask.
Yeah, that's I think one of the most important questions, because if law firms aren't trying cases or they're not litigating them, the truth is you're just never going to get fair value on the case in some certain circumstances, right? Yeah. If it's a policy limits case and you're getting the full limits, that's a different story. But if it's a catastrophic injury case or it's serious injuries or you're going to have, a lifelong disability, you have to litigate the case. That's the only way you can get the other side the real information they need and, the deposition, they get to talk to the client face to face and hear it from them, right? Otherwise, it's just an exchange of medical records and you're never going to pull the full or true value out of the case.
So how would let's say that someone is looking for a personal injury lawyer, how do you figure out if you're talking to someone who's really going to fight for you versus someone who you think is just trying to make a quick buck at your disposal?
Yeah, that's a tough question. And I don't know if you necessarily can from the beginning, but my advice would be is look for red flags and get out while you can, right? Because all personal injury lawyers work on a contingency fee. So as long as the lawyer hasn't gotten an offer on your case or they haven't settled the case, typically you can get out of the contract and you can hire another law firm. The bar and, everyone's pretty strict about that, right? Because they don't want people to be locked into somebody if they're not doing a good job. So my advice is look at the red flags and get out sooner than later, because we have a lot of clients who contact us and some it's early on and we can take the case over and, the outcome's great. But others, it's 2 years and there's already an offer, or the case is settled and they've done a terrible job. And at that point, frankly, it's just too late. The other law firm will have a lien on it, and we can't, once the damage is done and we don't work up the case properly from the beginning, there's nothing you can do. So, be careful. Like I said, do your research, vet the lawyer. I mean, you can pretty much tell right off the bat, I think, if the lawyer himself is going to be aggressive just by having a conversation and asking the right questions, right? What if they offer a low amount, or, the what's my case worth is the worst question ever, right? Because no one can ever answer that. But, what are you going to do if they offer you a low amount? And, questions like that can kind of help you vet the lawyer and determine if they're going to be aggressive or not, or be a good fit.
Makes sense. Okay, so when someone calls a personal injury lawyer and they need representation, the reality is at the end of the day, they want to get someone who's going to win the biggest verdict, biggest settlement for them that they possibly can. That's what it's all about. How do you do that for your clients?
There's really two parts. Number one, our focus is always making sure that our client gets set up with the right treatment. They see the right doctors and that their injuries get resolved. Because I tell all my clients this, $1 million does you no good if you're crippled, or if you can't enjoy it, if you're, in pain the rest of your life, right? No amount of money is worth that. So the first thing we focus on is making sure they have the right treatment, making sure they see the right doctors. Ironically, and in turn, just by doing this, it helps to build the value of their case, because it shows that they're treating, it shows they're injured, and we have medical documentation proving that, right? When I first started the firm, I had a mentor who taught me how to, work up cases, right? And I remember he said to me, he was like, there's some firms that, they get the same exact case. In one firm, they'll settle that case for $100,000, and the other firm, they'll settle that same exact case for $1 million. So you have to know how to work the case up properly. So, the thing is really painting the proper picture to the insurance company and advocating on your client's behalf to show the insurance how injured they actually are. So, that includes, sending them to doctors that will write us a report, indicating how injured they are, and, getting a life care plan that shows, past, present, and future loss of, life's pleasures and economic losses, lost wages, future estimated medical expenses, so on and so forth. So getting this documentation, getting the right treatment, putting it all together in a package that, is, easily readable for somebody on the other side, but also advocates the best you can, is really how you build up a case and you get someone, the maximum recovery that you could possibly get them.
Okay, so let's say someone picks up the phone and they call Wilk Law because they're seeking representation. What does the process actually look like for them?
Yeah, it's a good question. So there's many ways you can reach out. We've got a chat bot on our website. You can call the phone number. You can text in. When you do, it usually asks you a few simple questions. What kind of an accident were you in? Car accident, slip and fall. And then you'll be connected to a live intake specialist at the firm. Their job is basically just to pre-vet the case, get some information, find out what happened, when it happened, were you injured, kind of explain a little bit about what we do, how the process works. And if it seems like a case that we're willing to take and the client, wants to work with our firm, then we'll start, the onboarding process, which is basically gathering all the client information, the accident information, the insurance information, so on and so forth. We'll create a file. We'll sign the client up, explain, how a contingency fee works, how the whole process works, and then we get them signed on. Once they're signed on, they're immediately assigned to a lawyer and a paralegal. That paralegal will send them out a letter, basically 2 letters, indicating that they're the assigned paralegal with their contact information, and then a welcome letter that basically just, gives some tips and tricks on what to do or what not to do, keep a journal, stay off social media, so on and so forth. Then it really depends on the individual case, right? If the client was in a car accident and, they don't know where to go for treatment and they want a recommendation, we can recommend someone nearby. Or, if they, need transportation to get somewhere, we'll try to assist them with that. Or if they need help getting their car repaired, we'll try to point them in the right direction. So, it's basically just the intake process, a very simple process. Once we get you signed on, we jump on it right away and start working the case and doing whatever we need to do to get them on the right track.
So you do a lot more than I was expecting. I mean, so you're in, if it calls for it, you're helping them get medical treatment, help with their car.
Yeah.
Those are things I wouldn't have, intuitively, I just wouldn't have thought that a lawyer would actually be helping with. If someone gets hit by a drunk driver, it's kind of a no-brainer. They're going to pick up the phone and call a lawyer. But I have to imagine there's a lot of people out there who are maybe on the fence. Maybe they don't know if they have a case, or the entire process just seems intimidating. Maybe they're even a little scared. What would you say to someone like that who's hesitant just to pick up the phone and see if they have a case?
Yeah, we get that all the time. And for some reason, people have this, lawyer intimidation, thing in their mind. But we're just normal people. I mean, we're here to help them with their situation, right? So there's nothing to be intimidated about. I mean, I can't speak for a lot of other law firms, but everyone that works in my firm is super empathetic, super personable, super receptive, and super, sympathetic to every situation that every client's going through, right? So there's really nothing to lose by reaching out and at least having a conversation. And I think most people will be surprised that once they do, and once they feel like they have somebody, advocating on their behalf, they'll feel much better and they'll feel much more secure in what, lies ahead in the future.
Yeah, and this is what you do. It's not like they're bothering you by calling and asking a few questions to see if they have a case. And it doesn't cost anything, right?
No.
They don't have to pay you any money to ask you questions.
No, we give free consultations. And yeah, like you said, I love talking to people. I love giving advice. Even if it's not something we end up helping with or a case that we don't take, I'm still happy to point them in the right direction. And I can tell you that some of those people come back later when they have a friend or family member that needs our assistance, and, they'll send them our way. So, it's always good to help somebody, even if it's not something you can take in-house.
Okay, Wilk Law is well known as being an elite law firm. What do you think sets you apart?
Well, let's compare to these big firms, right? The firms that each lawyer is handling 300 to 400 cases. I can tell you that you cannot effectively handle that many cases. You just can't do it. You're just churning and burning the cases and getting them out for low settlements. We maximize values on all our cases. So I work with every single client on every single case and spend as much personalized time and attention as possible. To be frank, I'm a fucking warrior on these cases. Like, we don't back down. We put as much time and energy as we possibly can in these cases, and we ensure no matter what, whether you have a $5,000 case or a $5 million case, that you're getting the best outcome possible and every single dollar that you deserve from your settlement.
All right, so you've got an interesting perspective, because obviously you're a plaintiff's personal injury lawyer, but you spent some time working on the other side as defense counsel on behalf of insurance companies.
Yeah.
What are some things about insurance companies that people might not realize?
I mean, I'll just tell you straight up, insurance companies lie.
They lie.
They lie to clients. Sometimes they even lie to lawyers. I can't even tell you how many times a client will call our firm and they'll, ask for help, and they'll say, hey, I signed a release, but it was only for lost wages, right? I'm like, oh, okay, well, let me see the release you signed. And lo and behold, bodily injury release of all claims, so on and so forth, right? But the problem is the insurance companies tell the clients that it's only for lost wages. We're only going to, pay you for your lost wages. This doesn't have to do with anything else. And they trick the client into signing it, and not only that, but like even lawyers sometimes, like even last week, we had an insurance company lie about how much coverage they had, right? They told us they were self-insured and that they only had a certain amount of coverage. And then in discovery, once we, forced them to send the documentation over, we found out they had over $5 million in coverage.
Over $5 million.
Yeah. And I mean, this is what people don't understand. Like, this is why you need to hire a lawyer, because as much as you think the insurance company is your friend, and as much as you think you can trust them, you can't.
Tyler, thanks for being here, man. This is a lot of fun.
Yeah, my pleasure.